That is a very good question, Cindy. With remote learning, what prevents someone else from taking the test? Dwayne, do you have any insight on that? Because that's a very good question.
There are, I mean, this is where it gets with using interim assessments remotely. There are always going to be certain risks that you have with administering interim assessments. I would encourage teachers to try to, one of the things I've heard as a strategy is turning on cameras. So the teachers, the administrators, the test administrators can watch those. That's one of the strategies. That is always clearly the challenge in administering anything remotely, is making sure that you have, making sure you have that integrity in place for the assessment. And I'm not going to pretend that I have the perfect answer for it. I don't. That is definitely one of the challenges I think everybody faces in how do you ensure that the work you're getting is the students. Like I said, one strategy that I've heard that some districts are using is saying to students, if they have their cameras, just turn your camera on. Therefore, that can be monitored during that period in time in which the interims are administered.
And I guess the other thing that I would add, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but taking it at the beginning here, it could be used to help students place students, and so to use as much as the students know that you're utilizing the information to gauge where they are, it really helps in terms of teachers planning their teaching, because it should inform your instruction. So I don't know, just having those kind of conversations as well, but I get it. There's still going to be always somebody that's going to try to skirt around the system, but we can only do the best we can. Just ELA and math. Yes, just ELA and math, nothing else at this point. That was the other question. And
why we are recommending and requiring this for our comprehensive schools. So we are on the third-year cycle for our comprehensive schools, where we will be evaluating whether schools are going to continue into comprehensive status or be moving into rigorous action. And so right now, we don't have any data because we didn't give the SBAC in the spring in order for us to measure growth. And so if we potentially look at amending the state plan and trying to taking a look at how do we measure growth to determine if the schools can exit that criteria, we have to have something that is tied to that SBAC and has that validity. And so if we are able to give this ICA at the beginning of the year, and then the spring assessments that come, in 21 spring, we might be able then to look at the growth, because we have a gap year. We don't have any data from last spring. And so what I don't want to do is miss that opportunity, and then we won't even have the ability to potentially do that. I'm not promising that, but that's one really critical piece. And these are aligned to the standards and directly tied to the summatives that we give for the state exams in the spring. So that's really our thinking around here. And also, we want to be able to be taking a look at not only the growth from student to student, their student growth from the fall to the spring, but also within schools, but to be able to be comparing that against schools. And so if Browning does one test and Lodgegrass does another and Poplar does another, then we're not going to be able to have a standard way of measuring growth. So that's part of the reasoning for wanting to really, put forward an assessment. And these ones are free, and we have the ability to support the use of them, and we also, it can be done virtually if needed. So those are some of the thinking behind that. We certainly don't want to be, requiring a bunch of tests, but if we don't do it, then we're looking at potentially not having anything to even.
We were always required to do the ISIP in the past. So so if that's a discussion with my test coordinators, that we just do the interim, then we don't have to do the ISIP unless our building principals want to.
Go back with the exit criteria for our comprehensive schools. We were due to be looking at the third-year exit criteria from the spring results of 2020. We didn't get those results. And so now we're left in a place of looking at testing results for 2021. But part of the results, we have to be able to do a growth measure. And because we don't have 2020, we're going to have to figure out a way to show that growth in order for our schools to be measured. So we really want to have some options, because using test results from 2019 to 2021 is not really going to be effective. So we would like the ICAs to be given at the graded, 3rd through 11th grade, so that we can really take a look at growth for our students and really be able to have some possibilities. I'm not guaranteeing anything, because any amendment would have to go to the federal government, and the Department of Ed would have to approve of it. But this would give us a growth measure and help us kind of fill that gap of data that we don't have, that we didn't get this past spring. We want to be able to compare against schools, so we have to have data that everyone's using, if that makes sense. That is comparable.
It does. I think yes, and thank you for reiterating that. But I think what Karina is asking is that progress monitoring piece, where for Browning, they're using ISIP. Others might be using something else, but the requirement of using a progress monitoring tool. So she was asking, though, can they just use interims and not the progress monitoring tool? And that's where we left off.
Okay. So I think, Karina, you have to really think about a full balanced assessment plan, which would include screeners, diagnostics, formative assessments, summative assessments, interim assessments, and be thinking about that, because this ICA, or comprehensive assessment, is not a formative tool. It's also not a progress monitoring tool. It's not a screener or a diagnostic. And so I think, that's really what you would want to be looking at, is kind of that overall balanced view of what are you using for formative assessments, what are you using for the interim assessments, what are you using for some of the progress monitoring, and then screeners, especially for your 1st through 3rd grade. I would say that tool, the iStation, that's a good tool for progress monitoring and some of that screeners, especially for literacy and early literacy. So I would want, I would suggest that you kind of, the principals would have to decide which data do they need and the purpose for each kind of data point, knowing how they're using that overall to guide their instruction for each individual kiddo.
Okay, thank you. But I do want to just say, I think the ICAs can be a formative assessment as well. So I know that it's a summative at the spring, but it can be used as a formative.
Yeah, that's true. You could definitely use some of that data, and it does have some of that formative component. Yeah. But I know that the iStation, they use a lot of that for progress monitoring.
The science assessment, well, I'll have Dwayne talk about that. We're just not requiring the science assessment at this time to be taken. That could be totally up to you, but Dwayne, is there any updates that you want to give on the science assessment, and if that's going to be ready at that time as well? Is there a
Yes, there is. So that's kind of Ronnie's wheelhouse, but I will relay to you the broad general standing in science. Science this year is going online, as you well know. Its CRTs are going by the wayside. It will be going into the portal, the exact same portal that Smarter Balance was in. So for example, student test settings for Smarter Balance in TIDE will now stand true for also science. The alternate science is also in the exact same portal. So that portal, which was formerly known as AIR, is now, and sometimes people call it different things, so it can be a little confusing, but it's the TIDE portal where everybody had the student settings are science, alternate science, and Smarter Balance are all going to be in there, including Smarter Balance interims, which the interims we're talking about here, just for clarity, somebody asked that question. Yes, this is just referring to ELA and math, the Smarter Balance interims. Now, science will be putting out interims this year as well. Those interims are going to be more limited in scope for the first year. They are going to be very similar to your kind of your focused interim blocks, small little, they're called testlets. Those will not be available until September 15th rather than the August 24th date. So I believe for the purpose of this conversation, it is the interim math ELA ICAs is what we're talking about. But
Yes.
I think that answers your, I hope that answers your science question.